The day I realized I might get arrested for leaving my own house, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I probably would have lost my mind. Imagine that, 25 years in a place, mortgage paid off, memories stacked higher than the boxes in your garage, and suddenly some woman in red designer heels is screaming into a phone like you're robbing a bank just for moving out. That's how it started. It was early morning, Arizona sun already heating up the driveway, and I'd been loading boxes since dawn. Every trip from the house to the truck felt like peeling off another layer of the past. Lily's cookbooks, my old hardware store ledgers, a box of photos I couldn't bring myself to open yet. I thought the hardest part of leaving would be grief. I was wrong. I heard the heels before I saw her, sharp, deliberate clicks echoing off the concrete like a metronome set to irritation. Carol Whitfield, HOA president, human migraine in a pantsuit. She stood at the edge of my driveway like she owned the ground I was standing on, 2 security guards behind her like backup dancers in a dictatorship. "Going somewhere, Thomas?" she asked, all sugar and venom. I told her I was moving. Simple. Done. None of her business. That's when she pulled out the folder, thick, color-coded, rehearsed. Said I owed a $5,000 community separation fee. For leaving my own house. Said I was violating bylaws. Said she'd call the cops. And then she did. Watching someone dial 911 on you for packing your life into a moving truck, it does something to you. It's surreal. Like the world tilts sideways, and you're the only one who notices. The guards looked embarrassed. I felt furious. And Carol, she looked thrilled. The cops showed up fast. Officer Harris, tired eyes already over it. He skimmed the documents, looked at my deed, and basically said what any sane person would say. HOA rules don't override state law. You can't charge someone to leave their own property. Just like that, the spell broke. Carol's face went from smug to volcanic in under 10 seconds. But that wasn't the end. That was just the opening act. Because after the police left, she stepped closer, too close, and dropped the smile. Told me she'd been digging into my life. My son, my store, my lease, my wife's obituary. Said she had 23 pages on me. 23 pages. That's when I realized this wasn't some petty neighborhood spat. This was obsession. Control. A woman who didn't just want power, she needed it the way some people need oxygen. And when I finally pulled out of that driveway, I noticed the black SUV following me. Same distance. Same speed. Sentinel security. That's when the fear really started. The next morning, I opened my door and found it covered in bright yellow violation notices. 15 of them. Grass too tall, on a desert rock yard. Parking violations. Moving truck, aesthetic disruption. Fines stacked like confetti at a parade nobody wanted to attend. Timestamps? 3 a.m. She'd been up in the middle of the night manufacturing crimes. And it didn't stop there. Social media posts painting me as a menace. Neighbors suddenly avoiding eye contact. A man I'd grilled burgers with for 2 decades asking me to move my car because Carol said it hurt curb appeal. Isolation is a weird weapon. It doesn't leave bruises, but it breaks things inside you. My son Michael called that day, sheriff's deputy, level-headed like his mother. Told me to document everything. Every fine, every post, every encounter. Said she'd been filing false complaints for years. Gray rock her, he said. Don't react. Let her hang herself with her own rope. So I started documenting. Photos. Screenshots. Timelines. Paper trails. I'd run a hardware store for 30 years. I knew how to track inventory. Turns out evil leaves receipts too. The twist came at 2 a.m. I woke up to an engine idling outside. Same SUV. Camera pointed at my house. Red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mountain of yellow papers, and something clicked. One of the grass violations listed the wrong property number. Not totally wrong, just off by a couple digits. That tiny mistake cracked everything open. By sunrise I was deep in county records. Public databases are beautiful things, boring, tedious, brutally honest. And what I found made my hands shake. 6 months earlier, Carol had filed new HOA boundary maps. Expanded them. Illegally. 45 homes added without notice. People fined who weren't even under HOA authority. Families bullied out of homes she had no legal control over. It wasn't harassment. It was fraud. That discovery changed everything. Suddenly I wasn't a widower being pushed around by a tyrant. I was holding a thread, and if I pulled it, the whole sweater might unravel. And then came the unexpected ally. An old attorney named William Morrison called me out of nowhere. Said he'd been waiting 20 years for someone to catch her. Semi-retired, sharp as a blade wrapped in tweed. Took the case pro bono. Some cases, he told me over burnt coffee, you take for money. Some you take for justice. That was the moment the story flipped. We started reaching out to former residents. One by one, they told their stories. Exit fees. Fake violations. Forced sales. One couple fined daily until they sold their corner lot to Carol's niece. An old woman pushed out of the house where her husband was buried nearby. Patterns emerged. Not chaos. Strategy. This wasn't an HOA gone bad. It was a racket. And the biggest gut punch. The cemetery. Locked behind a keypad controlled by Carol. Even the dead needed her permission. I stood there staring at those gates, thinking about Lily buried behind them, and something inside me hardened. Grief turned into fuel. Not rage exactly, something colder. Resolve. That's when the second twist hit. A woman named Margaret, current resident, handed me a thumb drive. Her late husband had been gathering evidence for years before dying of a heart attack. Financial records, emails, board minutes, $500,000 unaccounted for. That drive turned suspicion into certainty. By then, we weren't just building a case. We were building a reckoning. We organized a plan for the next HOA meeting. Packed the room. Brought evidence. Brought witnesses. Lawyers. Even my son showed up in uniform. Off-duty but very visible. Carol walked in expecting another puppet show. Instead, she walked into a courtroom without realizing it. At first she tried the usual, charm, control, intimidation. But then Margaret started reading financial discrepancies. I laid out the fraudulent boundaries. People began recognizing their own stories in real time. And something incredible happened. Fear cracked. When fear breaks, it makes a sound, not loud but deep. Like ice splitting under pressure. People started speaking. Shouting. Demanding answers. Years of silence boiling over in minutes. And then Carol lost it. Completely. Started screaming about control, about ownership, about how she protected property values. Called it her kingdom. Said she owned the community. Said people should be grateful. 200 witnesses. Phones recording. An FBI agent sitting quietly in the crowd. That was the moment karma clocked in for work. She tried to run when the vote to remove her passed. Red heels stumbling, mask shattered. The applause that followed wasn't for me or Morrison or anyone specific. It was for freedom. 3 days later, the FBI showed up at her house. I watched from down the street like a man attending the closing scene of a movie he'd been trapped inside for years. Carol in a silk robe, screaming, denying, unraveling in real time. She ran. Tripped on her own garden edging, the expensive stuff she'd forced everyone to install. My son cuffed her calmly, professionally, like any other suspect. That image stuck with me. Power reduced to handcuffs. Months later, the verdict came down, 15 years federal prison. No parole for 10. The judge called it an egregious abuse of power. Families destroyed. Communities corrupted. And just like that, it was over. I moved to a cabin in Sedona. No HOA. No fines. No yellow notices taped to my door like radioactive wallpaper. Just desert air, quiet mornings, neighbors who wave because they wanna, not because a bylaw requires it. Maplewood Heights dissolved its HOA. Cemetery gates unlocked. Families moved back. Carol's house sold to a young couple who turned her command center into a playroom. That might be my favorite part. Kids laughing where tyranny once plotted. Funny thing is, the biggest lesson didn't come from her arrest. It came later, sitting on my porch one evening with a former neighbor who'd also escaped. He said something that stuck with me. We did it to ourselves. And he was right. Carol didn't rise out of nowhere. She grew in the silence we allowed. Every meeting we skipped. Every neighbor we didn't defend. Every time we chose comfort over confrontation. Tyrants don't just seize power. They're handed it, piece by piece, by people who hope someone else will deal with it. That realization hit harder than any of her threats. But here's the other truth. When enough people finally stand up, even the loudest tyrant starts sounding small. Now I sit on my porch most evenings watching the sun slide behind red rocks, coyotes singing somewhere in the distance, and I think about power. Real power. It's not control. Not fear. Not surveillance cameras or bylaws written in blood. Real power is quiet. It's waking up in a house where no one can fine you for breathing wrong. It's visiting your wife's grave without asking permission. It's drinking coffee while the world turns without needing approval from someone with a clipboard and a grudge. Real power is freedom. And freedom, I learned the hard way, isn't something you assume you have. It's something you defend. But here's the question that still lingers with me, and maybe it'll linger with you too. If Carol hadn't gone too far, if she'd been just a little less cruel, a little more subtle, would any of us have ever stood up? Or would we still be living under her rules, calling it normal? I'd really like to know what you think. Have you ever seen someone abuse power in a way everyone knew was wrong, but nobody stopped until it was too late? Where do you think the line is between keeping the peace and enabling a bully? If you've ever lived through something like that, a toxic workplace, a controlling neighbor, a system that just felt wrong, share your story. Because the more we talk about this stuff, the harder it gets for people like Carol to build kingdoms in the dark.